Hi writers! The purpose of this video is to introduce you to William Deresiewicz's What is College For? As we move through this unit and are exploring how different authors and sources answer this question, but this is the big overarching question of this unit that you will be addressing in your final paper, which is a source-based paper. So before we talk specifically about William Deresiewicz's ideas in the longer chapter piece that you are about to read, I want to just briefly review what Gary Gutting said in What is College For? So this maybe is a little bit confusing because they're titled the same, right? So I want to make sure that we keep these two separate. So Gary Gutting's What is College For? Was that shorter article that we read, opinion-based piece. And this is what he said sort of midway through. He made his thesis, or he made his claim. Colleges are not simply for the education of students, which I think that's what people assume college is for, right? And he says, yeah, that's an essential function. But he says the main reason of a college is to nourish a world of intellectual culture. So in other words, his main claim is that the college, the university, is important for the intellectualism of our culture and of our society. A world of ideas dedicated to what we can know scientifically, understand humanistically, or express artistically. So if this is true, then our job when we go to college is to learn everything we can in this world of ideas. And, arguably that's why we feel it's important for you to take science classes, even if you're not going into science, or art classes, even if you're not going into art, because the purpose of college is to nourish that intellectual world of everything people have found out in the long history of humanity, right? And the way everything is going and how all of these things are interconnected. He mentions here too, in our society, this world is mainly populated by members of college faculties. So this intellectual world is largely driven by what happens on college campuses. A lot of students don't know this, maybe until like grad school, but the college professors have two main roles. One of those roles is, of course, to teach students, but the other half of a college professor's job is to advance that research. So college professors are required to publish. If they're tenured professors, they're required to publish so that they're not only teaching within their fields, but they're advancing their fields. A lot of scientific research takes place on college campuses and is funded by, grants earned by college professors. So they're doing research, they're publishing within their own field, whatever that field is. So as you read as you read William Deresiewicz, What is College For? You're going to see some overlap of ideas here. In some ways they agree, but in other ways they, differ in their opinion. I wouldn't say they directly contradict each other. It's a little more subtle than that, but I do want you to start to pay attention to how all of these ideas are sort of talking to each other. In your paper, you will be doing synthesis, which is, we'll study that more in detail in the coming weeks, but synthesis is where you allow the sources to talk or interact with each other within your paper. And that requires an understanding of the subtle ways they're similar and different. So here we go. William Deresiewicz, What is College For? Is actually a chapter. It's chapter 5 from this book, Excellent Sheep, The Miseducation of the American Elite and the Way to a Meaningful Life. So a few things about William Deresiewicz. He was a Yale professor for about 10 years, and he was a guest professor at other universities, and usually sort of super elite universities. So one thing to keep in mind for context is this book is he's focusing on students at elite universities. And you want to consider that as you're reading, because that may help you form some commentary about, we want to think about in which circumstances does this apply? Does it apply everywhere all the time with anything we read, right? But also, what can we learn from it? What can we gain from it? Even if you disagree with key points, we want to be subtle. Even if you disagree with some of what you read in some of these essays, what can we take from it? What can we gain from it? What are the good points the author's making that more people need to consider? So it's chapter 5. It's one chapter from the book, so it is sort of pulled a little bit out of context, so keep that in mind. However, it could be a standalone essay as well. So William Deresiewicz begins actually by saying what he believes college is not for, and then he makes a couple main points about what he believes it is for. He begins by addressing, responding to, and contradicting some of the main rhetoric or the ways that we talk about college in this society. So he says, return on investment. That's the phrase you often hear today when people talk about college. How much money will you get out of doing it relative to the amount that you have to put in? So a lot of our national conversation about college right now is about whether it's worth it. And when we say that, we often mean like financially whether it's worth it. So will you make enough money with the career that you get to make the cost of that worth it? But he confronts and rejects this way of thinking about whether college is worth it or whether thinking about the value of college. He says we shouldn't be thinking about the value of college in terms mainly of money or financial return. He says what no one seems to ask is what the return that college is supposed to give you is. Is it just about earning more money? Is the only purpose of an education to enable you to get a job? I think that's a really powerful question. Then he says, but we never talk about the premises that underlie this conversation, as if what makes for a happy life and a good society were simply self-evident, and as if in either case the exclusive answer were more money. He acknowledges, and this is really important because sometimes students critique this essay and say he thinks money doesn't matter. He says it does, right? So of course money matters, jobs matter, financial security matters, national prosperity matters. The question is, are they the only things that matter? And then he comes on strong here. Life is more than a job, jobs are more than a paycheck, and a country is more than its wealth. Education is more than the acquisition of marketable skills. I want you to think about that. So we often think about, well, I'm going to have the certificate, I'm going to have the things to put on my resume when I graduate, and that's what he calls marketable skills. So, and we often think about, well, this certificate, the GPA, those things will make me more marketable. In other words, make me able to earn more money within the job market. But he says, you are more than your ability to contribute to your employer's bottom line or the nation's GDP, no matter what the rhetoric of politicians or executives would have you think. To ask what college is for is to ask what life is for, what society is for, what people are for. So this is quite a humanistic philosophy. Now you can critique that. You can come back and critique this and say, oh, we want to think about, is this a little bit maybe perhaps idealistic? Keeping in mind that he's talking about students at elite universities, many of which come from higher socioeconomic statuses. So it's perfectly acceptable to critique this, but you have to acknowledge what might be a good point about what someone is saying before you turn to critique. So what does he say it is for? Well, he has a couple main reasons. One claim he makes is it's about learning how to think. And he says before you can learn, you have to unlearn. And he claims that college is an excellent place to learn to unlearn. So I want you to pay attention to where you see that in the book and the argument that he's making there. He also says the purpose of college is to build a self. And he says it's not the same thing as discovering yourself, finding out who you are. He says building a self is really different. So I want to make sure we're not confusing those two and that you really understand and can accurately explain what he means by that, building a self. Not the same as finding yourself in college. We often use that phrase and it's a little bit cliche. He says it's about building a self. So I want you to pay attention to where you see that as well. One more thing I want to address is when Deresiewicz in the essay refers to the liberal arts. So right now in America, we have liberal versus conservative, right? But that's not really what is meant by, it's not like political in that way. It's not that quite that loaded. That term has been around for a really long time. So this is just some excerpts from an essay about what the liberal arts are. And on the left here we have, it's a depiction of what were considered the liberal arts, and this is in ancient Greece, where we sort of stole the idea of the university. These are the things that a free person, and usually a free man, would study. That a servant would have a trade-based education. They would learn their trade only. They wouldn't also learn how to play the harp, right, as a part of their formal education or whatever. But he said, a free person means you're free to explore the depth of knowledge, and also that you need some of these skills to fulfill your role as a free member of society. So he says liberal, meaning liberated, right? Not as opposed to conservative, but as free, in contrast to imprisoned, subjugated, or incarcerated. So a free person would have access to this type of deep learning and these skills like public speaking that they would want free people to have. Part of the reason we have general education in a university is that a university is meant to not be a trade school. It's not just about learning how to be a nurse or learning how to be a teacher, right? It's about learning these other skills, ability, intellectual habits that arguably a free person in society would benefit from, and then that would enrich the society as well. So this is what we mean when we say liberal arts. This is not from Deresiewicz, but it's just a little more explanation of that term. So when you come across it in Deresiewicz, you know what is being referred to there. So remember, as you read, Deresiewicz first begins by saying what he believes college is not for, and then he makes a couple very clearly stated claims. The first thing college is for is this. Other than that, college is also for this. So look out for the moments where he really clearly defines what it's for, but you got to get into the particulars as well because it's complex, right? This is a complex and dense thing, and he's making some clear arguments that are really distinct from some other different common ways that we think about college. So hopefully this is helpful to you in setting you up to read successfully and comprehend what you're reading and have some context for it. You do have some reading questions. Some of them are basic comprehension and some of them are asking you to think a little bit more deeply about the ideas themselves. It's really important that you read this article, this book chapter carefully because everybody will use Deresiewicz in their paper. So you will have the choice as to what other sources to use and incorporate in even the subtopic that you want to explore. But Deresiewicz is a required source because I think he makes an interesting point that I want all of us to engage with. That doesn't mean you have to use it as a source that you agree with. You can use it as a jumping off point. You can offer a critique of it, or you can go a separate way and sort of just incorporate this, and we'll talk about how best to do that as we go. But this will be required, so you want to make sure to read it carefully. Let me know if you have any questions, and I hope you enjoy it and learn something and sort of expand your horizons as far as thinking about the role of a university education in our society and in ourselves.